17 years ago, there was an announcement for a video game by Disney Interactive and Square Enix, known at the time as Squaresoft. A video game featuring what seemed to be a weeaboo anime character fighting alongside the Disney characters Donald and Goofy. There was a giant key, magic spells, big monsters, and of course, a very horrible camera. It went through a couple of changes until it was finally released in 2002, under the name of Kingdom Hearts. As a boy named Sora, you team up with several Disney characters and travel across the universe, searching for your missing friends and taking on a whole rogues gallery of Disney villains. And once in a while you'd come across some Final Fantasy characters. Now with this being a crossover between Disney and Final Fantasy, this seemed like the stupidest and most impossibly ridiculous idea for a video game of all time. But we sort of already knew that. What we didn't know was that this one unsuspecting game was merely the beginning of an explosive cultural phenomenon. Kingdom Hearts was a surprising success with fans of Disney, Final Fantasy, and video games in general, and what followed was possibly one of the biggest stories in video game history. What seemed like a really dumb idea quickly became a huge icon in the video game world, spawning 2 direct sequels with Kingdom Hearts 2 becoming one of the most beloved video games of all time. Then began the very long wait for the release of Kingdom Hearts 3, and in the meantime, the presence of Kingdom Hearts was felt all across the globe. The fanbase, the fan art, the cosplay, the abundance of YouTube videos trying to make sense of the plot, the memes, the fan theories, the fanfictions, you name it. While the third game was taking quite a long time to release, there were a couple of mid-quel games like Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance which, because they were essential to the plot, helped to tie fans over while waiting for the official third installment in the series. And in 2013, hope for the franchise was reborn when the game's development had officially begun, only to leave fans waiting for another 5 years. But after a couple of remixes and a couple of trailers teasing the finale, we finally got Kingdom Hearts 3. With all the hype that was behind this game, it was pretty obvious that there were gonna be a lot of different reactions to it. And while that isn't really a bad thing in itself, there's also been a lot of ridiculous reactions to the game too. Several were made with understandable arguments, but several felt like the person in question had never really played a Kingdom Hearts game before. And of course, somewhere in the middle, we got a bunch of whiners clinging way too hard to their KH1 and KH2 nostalgia. With all of these different viewpoints, it's actually become quite a challenge to determine what exactly is the final quality of Kingdom Hearts 3. So considering that the last several months of this channel have been pretty dedicated to Kingdom Hearts, I decided out of curiosity and determination that I would give my own review of this game. So grab a snack, sit back, relax, and watch as I delve into the long-awaited conclusion to the biggest childhood hype train of all time. This is my review of Kingdom Hearts 3. So before we begin, allow me to explain how this review will be presented. I'm gonna break down the game into 3 categories to better organize my analysis. First, I'll talk about the presentation, which will focus on the graphics, level design, voice acting, etc. Second, I'll talk about the insane balls-to-the-wall gameplay. And third, I'll be talking about the story aspect of the game. Now for what it's worth, I've played through this game twice, as I believe that I need to play the game more than once in order to properly review it. There's actually a lot of differences between your first and following playthroughs of a video game since they can offer a different experience. You can notice things that you didn't notice before and also get a chance to double check the facts so that you're not misrepresenting anything. There will also be a few times where I address the incorrect criticism the game has received. So if you want, you could see this as a response review to ones like Cosmonaut Variety Hour, but it's not something I'm gonna do the whole time since it would make the review feel a little repetitive. Finally, at the time of this recording, I am talking about the game while it's in its vanilla state. There have been talks about future DLC, which can potentially change my feelings on this game in the future. If they do, I might make a follow-up video talking about those feelings, but this review will focus solely on how I feel about the game on its initial release. So with all that out of the way, let's begin this review by talking about the first aspect of the game, the presentation. The most noticeable advantage KH3 has is obviously in terms of the technology used to make it. The hardware of the PS4 would allow for much more impressive visuals and texture details, and without a doubt, the visual aspect for both graphics and design style are unquestionably amazing. These are the most stunning visuals in the series to date, making the characters and backgrounds look much more lively than ever before. Originally, the game was going to be made with the Crystal engine, but for various reasons they changed it to Unreal 4, and I have to admit that it fits the style that they're going for much better. The textures that Unreal 4 uses feel much more in line with the cartoon aspect of the game than the realism of Crystal. Unreal 4 faithfully captures the visual style of the original movies as well as the models of the various Disney characters. You can see that they really put time into capturing the details of each one, like Mike's running motions and anatomy from Monstropolis. His movements and expressions are perfectly rendered to a T, like they really took the time to watch the movie and take notes on various details, which is a level of effort that can certainly be appreciated. Another great thing about the presentation is that it allows for much more expressive cutscenes. Characters actually emote, have a wider range of body language, more detailed facial expressions. Even the cinematography in a lot of these cutscenes has a much bigger and wider scope to it. They even discluded all of those awkward scenes where the dialogue is replaced with these speech bubbles and everyone is just using those stiff movements. All of the cutscenes are 100% voice acted, making them much more engaging. One new detail that they added is how the characters actually talk as you make your way through the worlds, which at first I thought was going to be repetitive, but is actually a much needed detail to make your allies feel more engaged with the player.
This might be a good spot to find some ingredients.
Okay, when they talk about ingredients, it's annoying, but when they're not talking about ingredients, it's really appreciated dialogue. It feels more natural for the characters to actually say something while traveling instead of just waiting silently for the next cutscene, and it helps you feel like they're actually interacting with the world around them. They even added some entertaining optional dialogue if you do certain things while exploring the areas.
Voice. Hey, you sound funny. Gosh, and so do I. What? Well, this is rather embarrassing. Who said that? Get a load of me, Buzz. I sound like an alien. So do I.
There's actually a number of different ways you can interact with your allies. Your teammates have some pretty funny reactions when you focus on them using the gummy phone, especially when they come from a timeline where they don't know what a phone or camera is. I really like how Corona has this side mission where you can interact with Rapunzel and the environment to help her get in touch with the outside world. It's optional, but it's a fun way to interact with her while she's on your team. It also gives you a nice reward, so it further encourages you to try it out. And while it's not a significant element, I have to admit that I was really impressed with the voice acting in this game. For example, did you know that John Goodman didn't return to reprise his role for Sully?
Nice, Sully! Even with those extra pounds you put on!
Still running circles around you, Butterball. You're right, Mikey. Let's get our girl home.
Whoever they got to voice in this time around actually did a really good job replacing him. If you didn't take the time to look up who voiced Sully in this game, you probably wouldn't have figured out that it was someone else. And it's a quality that finds itself present throughout the game. A lot of the original voice actors didn't do the voices for these characters, but the replacements they got are really good. Woody and Buzz's voice actors are nearly identical to Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. Kelsey Lansdowne does a nice Mandy Moore impression, Carlos Alaz does a good impression of Billy Crystal, they got the iconic Carrie Payton to do Wasabi, and as a non-Disney example, Corey Burton did a really nice job filling in Christopher Lee's place. There's actually a lot more talented voice acting behind this game than people give it credit for, with many of them having just the right range for the characters they're doing. Even Haley Joel Osment did a really good job returning as Sora. It's pretty obvious that he's gotten a lot older over the years and that he's now a 30-year-old man trying to voice a 17-year-old boy, but it really goes to show just how well he grew up with the character. He manages to use the right tone to portray Sora as a young adult, and some of these line reads are really spot on.
Kyrie! Why her? Why?
There are several issues in the voice acting though, most specifically the cringe-inducing dialogue that they're forced to read half the time. Just the way they read some of these lines is really annoying and they're not given enough direction to make it more bearable. Lines like this,
I do know hurt.
and lines like this,
It's not the sum of our parts. It's the sum of our hearts.
is really more grating than I care to suffer through. There's also some voice acting that just really doesn't feel right. Most notably is the voice of Mickey Mouse. I've seen a lot of Mickey Mouse impressions over the years, and this was really not one of the good ones. Brett Ewan takes a lot of time to get used to this time around, which really feels weird since he sounded a lot better in Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance.
Keyblades are not something you use just to bully somebody around. It's not me. I think it's because you finally found inside you that special strength to protect what matters.
You also have the, shall I say, unfortunate state of Xehanort's voice acting. I don't have anything against Rutger Hauer. I mean, he did his best to sound like an evil old man, and he doesn't do a bad attempt. But there's just not enough talent behind his acting to make it convincing. This was unfortunately an inevitable problem since Leonard Nimoy was just so iconic and impossible to replace. He was just the perfect choice to voice Xehanort, and any replacement was obviously not going to match his talent. It's really not something I can blame the game or the casting for, but it's still something made present that needs to be addressed. But enough about that, let's get into the real meat of the game's presentation, the level designs. With the upgraded technology, it's pretty obvious that the areas were going to be bigger and more pretty looking, and it's an excellent step forward. The areas are bigger and wider, and it helps to make the game feel less linear than some previous entries in the series. The platforming is a lot better than the bullshit we got in Kingdom Hearts 1, and the size of these areas heavily encourage you to search for treasures and collectibles. Not only is this beneficial for exploration, but it also helps to make the combat a lot more satisfying. Levels have big open spaces allowing for more mobility in a fight, offering the player additional options for approaching enemies. But what really helps to make these levels so good isn't because of how big they are, but because of how they're actually designed. Aside from the atmosphere being colorful and lush, each of these worlds also has a unique scheme, so you feel like you're traveling to different places instead of just the same level 10 times. Olympus allows you to actually explore the movie's world by traveling through Thieves and Mount Olympus, unlike previous entries that just force you to go to the Colosseum. Twilight Town, in spite of its smaller size, feels like an actual town, with townspeople talking to each other and even having a cafe and theater in different corners of the map. Toy Box has a multi-floor mall with massive variety, which helps make Toy Story feel brilliantly incorporated into the game. Not to mention, they did a really spot-on job recreating Andy's room. It also really takes advantage of how Sora was turned into a toy by allowing you to travel through vents and making a common neighborhood street look like a really huge field to venture across. Corona has a gorgeous color contrast in all of its areas, and it brilliantly takes advantage of environments from the movie, allowing Rapunzel to swing across trees to fight enemies, and help Sora get through large gaps. You're even allowed to freely explore some of Rapunzel's kingdom. There's a town square, a fishing dock, towers to climb, even some food stands where you can get ingredients for cooking. Monstropolis is a really interesting world as you get to see how the developers are able to fit the factory together like an actual factory, roaming around Monsters Inc. and seeing how it all fits together. And the Caribbean level is absolutely huge, with a ton of land and sea to explore. It's also one of the most visually captivating places in the entire game, with rough textures that perfectly capture the aesthetic of the original movie while fitting live-action characters into a more cartoony setting. There's a lot of terrain, Port Royale is a lot more interactive than last time, and you can travel to all sorts of caves and islands across the map, making it a thriving area loaded with possibilities. Now, a lot of whiny KH fans have been accusing these worlds of being empty and lifeless with nothing to do. So, did these people even pay attention while playing the game? There's a lot of life and activity injected into many of these worlds. Toy Box has a big mall and a lot of variety with different playrooms, stores, vents, Andy's room, and helium talk. You can jump into mechs and use them for combat, knocking play blocks to enter new areas, solve puzzles, and on top of that, you can actually attack registers and steal money from the store. The NPCs in Twilight Town, Corona, and Port Royale add a lot of life into the towns. They socialize with each other and react to Sora running past them. You can even do some street moves in front of them and they give you money for your performance. It's like they made these towns into actual towns and it's great. They even have environments that you can attack with your Keyblade for free items and orbs. There's interactive minigames like the festival dance and sliding down the snowy mountain, and they're not nearly as painful as the musical segments from Atlantica. Twilight Town also has a restaurant that brilliantly incorporates Ratatouille into the game by allowing you to cook meals that you can use to gain stat bonuses for combat. And the story doesn't force you to revisit them like in KH2, resulting in a lot less backtracking. They even made magic more interactive, where they affect the environment and allow Sora to perform slow motion without walls and branches. You can set the ground on fire, jump into the air using arrows, slide across precise using Blizzard, and they leave elemental status effects on both enemies and you, making magic feel much more involved in combat. But unfortunately, there are a few worlds that feel really boring and lackluster to go through. Let's start with Arendelle, which despite allowing you to interact with snow by bowling enemies and leaving footprints in the snow, just feels really uninteresting compared to other areas in the game. The color scheme and visual variety are really limited, with the only environments you come across being snowy mountains and a dark icy labyrinth. All you ever see in this level is just snow and ice, which gets really boring after a while, and the story forces you to go back down the mountain at least 3 times. It just feels really repetitive that you have to keep going back up after all the time you spend trying to get there in the first place. The labyrinth that Larxene traps you in also feels really dull and gloomy, with everything looking almost exactly the same. You feel like you're just going around in a big circle a lot of the time, and because of how much of the labyrinth just looks exactly the same, you feel like you're just losing your sense of direction. Even after obtaining the minimap, you'll still have a hard time navigating this place due to its confusing structure. And if that wasn't bad enough, there's the horrendous sledding segment and the Olaf mission jammed in the middle of the storyline. The sledding segment forces you to avoid an avalanche while getting attacked by Heartless, and it's really bad. There's no warning for this segment before it shows up, and the game takes away your ability to heal, meaning you'll be forced to do it with missing health if you didn't know it was coming. But even if you do have full health, the controls are clunky and the camera is horrible. Your movement is way too slow when you stagger in between jumps, making you vulnerable to enemy attacks. The camera is too zoomed in onto the trio, preventing you from properly reacting to the dragons chasing you. And the icy fog at the end only makes it even harder to see what's going on. And then you have the obnoxious, ear-grating mission where you have to find Olaf's missing body parts. The game doesn't give you any useful clues until about the 4th time you get it wrong, and listening to the characters saying the same thing over and over and over and over is so aggravating and distracting. And the game forces you to do this again when you come back to explore for treasures and lucky emblems. With all this put together, along with the fact that the storyline is mostly just a feckled retelling of the movie, Arendelle ends up being an extremely underwhelming experience and unfortunately one of the worst in the game. But to Arendelle's credit, it's not nearly as bad as the 100 Acre Wood, which is a 100% complete waste of time. So you travel into the book thinking you'll get to explore the 100 Acre Wood, right? You might get to see Tigger's house, or go through the woods, or even maybe meet Christopher Robin for the first time. But if you thought you were gonna get anything worthwhile, you are in for a serious downward spiral, because the only area you get to explore is Rabbit's Garden, a really small area that barely looks any different from the first 2 times you went there. Oh, and instead of having a variety of minigames like in KH1 and 2, you only get to play the exact same minigame 3 times with the exact same tutorial each time you start it up. It's just 3 different skins of Bust-A-Move, and it gets more repetitive the more times you do it. The story doesn't even have a reason for being in the game because there's no problem to solve. In KH1, you had to help Pooh find his missing friends. In KH2, you had to help Pooh regain his lost memories. Both of these scenarios are a result of pages being torn from the book, which encouraged the player to explore the worlds to find them. It was given a purpose in the other games because there was a side quest attached to it and a conflict within the book's world. But in KH3, their only motive for going in the book is because Sora isn't on the damn cover. It's not damaged, there's no missing pages, none of the characters are missing, nothing. Pooh just wanted to hang out with Sora because he forgot the lessons he taught him in his previous visits, but they don't make visiting the book fun. The other games allowed you to freely explore the world of the book, using missing pages as a means of transportation to different locations. They took the time to make the book fun and memorable by making it a world all its own. None of that stuff is in the KH3 incarnation. They could have incorporated a storyline from the Search for Christopher Robin or the Tigger movie, which would have allowed the player to freely roam the 100 Acre Wood. But no, it's just a generic gardening minigame. I mean, the purple Heffalump is in the game. You didn't think to use the storyline from Pooh's Heffalump movie to introduce him to Sora? It literally feels like Winnie the Pooh had absolutely no reason to be in this game and was just put in there out of obligation. Finally, there's San Francisco, which, while not as bad as 100 Acre Wood, ends up being really boring to go through. It's a big place to be sure, but it also feels really padded out. There isn't much to do in spite of its huge size, and the amount of exploration you get to do during the storyline feels really restricted and minimal. Every time they send you out into the city, they just place you in the same areas, so you're not even allowed to go anywhere refreshing the whole time you're there. Not to mention that the story missions are also really boring. You end up having to save everyone in a needlessly long rescue mission, and you're forced to do a stupid racecourse minigame in order to advance. In one instance, the waypoint guiding you to your objective doesn't even show up until 5 minutes later. So until Hero gets to the garage, you're just aimlessly wandering around in circles, which gets frustrating really fast. And the race course minigame is so awful. The course seems to be designed around flow motion, but it's not incorporated properly. The control over Sora feels too loose, and the camera doesn't do anything to properly support you. There's no tutorial for the second course, forcing you to go into it blindly, and it incorporates these shitty flight controls with Sora on Baymax's back. And the rings you have to go to switch rails at the last possible microsecond without giving you any time to react to them. With its enormous size, you'd think San Francisco would have been fun to explore, but it ends up being a huge missed opportunity. I do have to include how using Union X power to defeat the Demon Tide was a great highlight in the final chapter. The battle itself isn't all that much, but what really makes it so satisfying is seeing how the help that you get from all of these Keyblades are actually relics from the people who played Union Cross. It's almost like something out of the true final boss battle from Nier Automatica, receiving help from total strangers who took the time to interact with the game's world. It's a really great love letter to the people who took the time to play the game in spite of its insignificance, and if you happen to see your name during that segment, I am really happy for you. And of course, what would a Kingdom Hearts game be without its soundtrack? And the music in this game is amazing. Like, really amazing. There's a huge production behind the instrumentals with big powerful orchestras and updated remixes of familiar soundtracks. There's a healthy variety of music from familiar pieces to new ones, and they find some interesting ways to incorporate tracks from previous games into the scenarios of the storyline. One track in particular I really like to think about is this game's version of Dearly Beloved, which is easily the best version of the song by far. It has this really climactic feel to it, symbolizing how Sora has matured as a character and how the series has come so far over the last 17 years. It's a beautiful culmination of everything that's come before now, symbolizing the start of a new journey as well as the end of a saga. It just feels so triumphant and the perfect welcome back for everyone who's been part of the adventure since the beginning. It's the perfect prelude to a grand finale. And finally, let's talk about the opening sequence, Face My Fears. A lot of people have been complaining about its dubstep style not fitting the series, thus naming it a bad opening. But there's two things wrong with that. First, it's not dubstep, it's future bass. There's clearly a difference between the two. Second, Kingdom Hearts 1's opening has a remix with a similar tone, and for some reason no one seems to bring that up when talking about this opening. What makes Face My Fears such a good opening isn't just its choice of music, but more importantly, how it's directed in a way that feels appropriate for a long-arching saga. The vocals and instrumentals are very energetic, and the visuals are edited in a way that fits the song properly. The synchronizing is very on point, with the visual storytelling happening in accordance with the tone of the music. And Sora's opening line, when you put it in perspective of the overall story, is really captivating. How the strongest people are the ones who embrace what they are instead of seeking what others want them to be. It's a great opening sequence that leaves me with goosebumps every time I see it. So yeah, Kingdom Hearts 3 actually has some pretty amazing presentation. The visuals, level design, voice acting, and music all have really good things behind them, and it delivers throughout the experience. It's a definite treat to the eyes and ears as you journey through the game and beat the shit out of everything in your path. So with the game's presentation behind us, let's move on to the second portion of this review, the gameplay. And holy crap, is the gameplay in Kingdom Hearts 3 absolutely insane. Just the act of listing the huge variety they injected into this one is mind-blowing. Team attacks, weapon swapping, sliding down terrain, shot locks, attraction attacks, mech combat, flow motion, rail grinding with shooting mechanics, summons, weapon transformations, air diving, keyblade forging, a cover system with shooting mechanics, grand magic, interactive magic, wall running, air stepping. Everything is here and it's astounding. The game offers so many options for fighting enemies and does a lot to encourage the player to experiment with each of them. And even after that, there's a huge load of new features included that add to the experience. You can customize and swap between 3 shortcut menus instead of just 1, allowing you to have access to a total of 12 shortcut commands. You can now use items in midair, which is extremely helpful and convenient. The game also allows you to keep all forms of magic instead of just permanently being stuck with the strongest ones, so you're given the option to choose how powerful and variant your magic is. The Kupo coins that you purchase at stores can act as Phoenix Downs for a single use. They can save you in a tough fight, but they also restrict you to holding only one at a time to prevent them from being exploitable. If you do end up dying, the game has a prepare and retry option which allows you to readjust your equipment, then immediately go back to the start of the fight without having to see the cutscene. You get stat bonuses for eating meals cooked by Remy, and having an entire course meal gives you a cuisine bonus that grants you a special ability. And after eating a meal, you can save it as a favorite, so you can instantly access your favorite bonuses whenever you want. With the game's stronger hardware, you can have all of your party members in combat at one time, so you don't have to waste time swapping allies in and out anymore. There's also deeper customization options for your party members, so you can further adjust how they behave in combat. You can use certain types of magic to chain into other attacks, such as flow motion. The select area feature allows you to teleport across a world without going in and out the gummy ship, enabling faster transportation. And with the areas being bigger, they increase Sora's running speed so he can travel through areas more quickly, in a way that complements the map size. But one thing I absolutely love about this game is how it has the best item synthesizing system to date. Gone are the stressful hours of killing the same enemies over and over again. Gone are the bullshit requirements needed in order to have access to creating the most powerful items. The Moogle Workshop is so merciful this time around. They let you create the most powerful weapons, armor, and accessories by simply collecting synthesis items instead of having to level up the shop or synthesize every other item on the list. And the drop rate of items is extremely generous and forgiving. I was actually collecting more shards, stones, gems, and crystals than I can even keep track of. And I only had 2 lucky strikes throughout my first playthrough. It greatly speeds up the pacing of your playthrough instead of dragging it to a grinding halt. They even give you the ability to buy certain items with money instead of having to synthesize them. All you need to do is get the Mog card from shopping regularly and you can get certain items like elixirs much more commonly. But enough about the extra stuff. What about the actual combat? Well, here's where things get complicated because there is a lot of gameplay options in KH3. First, the actual fighting in this game. The combat is excellent. It immediately feels familiar with people who grew up with Kingdom Hearts 2, with smoother and improved tech behind it. With a new gameplay speed, combat is highly active. It has some big presentation but maintains a balanced pace. It flows smoothly and finds a way to fit all of your combat options into battle. And now with the ability to have all of your allies fighting at once, they were able to make the command menu feel less complicated. Everything is accessible from the one command menu, so you're not leaving yourself vulnerable by switching between two. The game even gives you the ability to slow down time when selecting certain commands, so you can stay focused on choosing an option and not worry about getting ganged up on. And as I said earlier, the huge variety of abilities and battle mechanics is very appreciated. The game gives you so many different ways to fight off enemies, and they all feel useful. You really feel like this super powerful badass who cannot be stopped. Of course, this would be a good time to bring up the issue that a lot of people have had with this game. That being how KH3 is brainless and how each new ability just gives you a new way to mindlessly mash buttons, while apparently KH1 and 2 are examples of less button mashy game design. I really don't know what to say to these people except you have extremely poor memory of the previous games, because it's literally been this way for years.
Start the game mashing 1 button and finish the game mashing 2 buttons, as every single ability is mapped to the exact same place.
The appeal to Kingdom Hearts gameplay isn't that it's just brainless button mashing, it's that the series finds a way to make it fun and engaging. Much like KH2, KH3 offers combat modifiers as you level up and progress, making your combos and finishers feel more powerful and visually engaging over time. It may not have the same speed KH2 had, but it manages to remain really tight. It manages to maintain the slick and smooth movement that the series is known for, and it doesn't feel the least bit clunky. With the new hardware, the game allows for more enemies to battle at one time. It's not really a problem though, as it does help to pace the battles more evenly considering Sora's huge arsenal this time around. But the best addition to the combat by far is definitely in the way they handled Keyblades. A lot of people have criticized the game for not having a lot of Keyblades, but when you put it into perspective with the forging, swapping, and transformations, it really doesn't matter. Giving Sora the ability to swap between 3 Keyblades encourages you to experiment with different weapons instead of just quickly discarding all the others when you get to the one with better stats. You don't get that same feeling that you got in KH1 and 2 when you immediately stop using one Keyblade when you get another with higher attack power. If you do, however, find yourself with a Keyblade you'd like to stick with, you can use the Keyblade forging system in the Moogle shop. This allows Keyblades to grow stronger and more useful over time, and it lets the player stick to the playstyle they prefer most. Speaking of different playstyles, each Keyblade also offers a unique method of gameplay. both in stats and how they function through weapon transformations. Ever After is magic-based, Shooting Star is long-range, and Happy Gear is for physical combat. These transformations give Sora entirely new movesets and abilities that feel unique to each Keyblade. They even change the behavior and nature of your magic so they're not just spammable shots of energy. They even come with their own unique shot locks that each have different methods of dealing damage. Something else to note about these form changes is that it's possible to store them through swapping Keyblades. By doing this, you can further reserve and mix up your playstyle. You can save certain forms for certain fights to give you an advantage in battles you might have a hard time in, or even keep them reserved for the next battle by switching to a Keyblade whose form change isn't activated. The form changing system combined with the Keyblade swapping system acts as a really good replacement for the drive forms from Kingdom Hearts 2, giving you the ability to swap between magic, defensive, and physical movesets at any time. It hastens the gameplay by allowing you to change your strategies and weapons on the fly instead of having to pause and change your loadout after each battle. It adds a sense of strategy to the gameplay in a way that very few entries in the series managed to pull off. They even made an improvement over Anti-Form with the KH3 equivalent, Rage Form. Unlike Anti-Form that showed up randomly and out of your control, Rage Form is something you can optionally activate freely if you take too much damage. It's also a lot more easy to control, with less over-the-top movements that help keep Sora in place instead of darting and flying around. The risk in using it is also an improvement over Anti-Form. Anti-Form was a terrible way to implement the risk and reward system from KH2 since the game already presented a way to limit how much you would use drive forms with the drive gauge. It was meant to be seen as a punishment for abusing the drive system, but it doesn't exactly work since you can avoid Anti-Form altogether by activating a form outside of battle. And the final form gave you the ability to drop the percentage chance of getting Anti-Form to 0 anyway. Anti-Form had virtually no benefit since you were not only unable to heal and control when it would activate, but also take twice as much damage. On the other hand, Rage Form allows you to keep your party members so they can heal you if you're low on health. You don't take double damage and it has a much better risk and reward system. The risk ability cuts Sora's health in half in exchange for increased efficiency with standard combos. You can continuously sacrifice health for more powerful combos and even shortcut to the finishing move. The form doesn't recover MP though, so don't think of it as a shortcut for using cure spells. Another big addition to the game is attraction moves, which allows Sora to summon Disney rides to attack enemies in different ways. While the game does just throw these at you out of nowhere, the controls for them aren't complicated, so you get used to them pretty quick. A lot of people have been split with this addition as it does come across as too gimmicky, and it really shows just how heavily involved Disney was in the game's development. But they're completely optional to use, so if you don't like them, you don't have to worry about them interfering with your playstyle. As for looking at them individually, some of them are fun to use, while others are not fun to use. The Mad Teacups is a personal favorite of mine as it really feels like you're in control of a giant teacup, spinning around and jumping across the field and colliding with the other teacups to deal sparking damage. It's a highly mobile attack as you can spin to increase your speed, but it never feels too fast or too loose like it's out of your control. Splash Run is really useful for crowd control as you travel across the area in a water raft while leaving a trail of water in your path. You can ram into enemies for extra damage and even leave a trail of water mid-air by jumping. You finish off by riding the trail of water you left behind all across the battlefield, ramming into enemies and dealing the final blow with a huge splash of water. It's a highly interactive attack and definitely one of the best in the game. But then you got the attractions that are just really boring and unengaging to use. The pirate ship is really just about as boring as it gets. All you do is just watch a boat swing back and forth while occasionally turning it to hit something in another direction. It feels really slow compared to the other attractions, so it just feels like a real sloth to use. Blaster Blaze, while having mobility, ends up falling really short due to a crammed camera and one-note controls. You can't see where you're going since you're forced into a first-person perspective, and it doesn't even do that much damage, so it's not even that useful. Then there's the most boring one to use, Magic Carousel, where you do absolutely nothing but wait for a blue line pattern to time your presses with the X button. It's not even interactive in the slightest, like using the analog stick as a means to spin it around to go faster. And it feels self-defeating since it demands your full attention on the blue lines, which requires you to look away from the finish meter. Unless you have auto-finish equipped, you risk missing the finisher, which is really frustrating. Definitely the worst attraction move. The air step ability was something I thought I was going to hate at first, but once you get the hang of it and figure out how it works, it becomes a very useful ability for both travel and combat. You can use it to leap across the map more quickly and also close in on enemies if they get too far away. It helps to speed up travel and platforming during certain parts of the game, and it doesn't consume the focus bar so you can freely use it as much as you want. You also have situation commands activated by the triangle button, which allows you to perform grand magic, team attacks, and activate Keyblade transformations. They appear differently depending on what kind of playstyle you use and how well you perform in combat. It's a mechanic that rewards the player for playing the game in different ways, thus further encouraging them to experiment with combat options. There's also a total of 5 summons in the game, each with their unique method of attacking and strategy behind them. You can even use them as a replacement for cure spells, as using them will fully restore your health, allowing the player to make a comeback under stressful situations. KH3 is a game with plentiful gameplay possibilities, and there really are just so many different ways to play through the game. The way it brings back things from previous games while mixing in new stuff certainly seemed like a challenge, but they actually found a way to fit it all together pretty well. Something that people have complained about is how it feels like a lot of this stuff is being forced on you and it reduces player choice along the way, which really doesn't make any sense. While Mountain Coaster is required to complete 2 specific battles, everything I mentioned in the last several minutes is 100% optional. There's plenty of player choice in the game, as it allows you to fight however you want. You don't need to use this stuff if you don't want to, and if you do, the game provides you with a way of selecting which options you like, as well as incorporating ways to speed up the combat. The triangle commands have a time limit set to them, which will run out if you don't use them. You can swap between them using L2, or even allow the timer to run out so you don't have to use them at all. You're given the option to only use the ones you like instead of all of them being forced on you, so saying that you're just gonna use all of them doesn't really count if there's a way for you to not use them. You also have the ability to shut off cinematics for attractions and Keyblades if you don't want to see a cutscene before using them. The attractions can even be cancelled at any time if you use them by accident or just want to get out of them early. One benefit the triangle commands have is that they do break up the button mashing muscle memory that you've accumulated over the course of the series. They have you stop and think about which ones to use, which does help make the combat feel less brainless. So in spite of the huge library of game mechanics, KH3 still takes the time to give you player choice. You don't have to use team attacks, attraction moves, form changes, magic spells, or summons if you feel they're too OP, and just stick to basic Keyblade swinging. And even after that, with all the other options available in this game, you can still approach combat however you want. There are still gonna be people complaining about how the game was too easy, and you know what? It's a pretty meaningless criticism when KH2 wasn't any harder. I honestly find it fascinating that people say KH3 was too easy while completely forgetting that KH1 and 2 were also easy games with mechanics that were really easy to exploit. From KH1 allowing you to spam Kiriga to KH2 having Chicken Little as an insanely powerful summon. Not to mention how insanely overpowered they made Sora's combo modifications. And that's not even the half of it. A lot of people have made the argument that critical mode made KH2 harder and more balanced. Well, that's just a big fat lie. I've beaten the game on critical mode and I have the screenshot to prove it, and simply increasing the amount of damage enemies dealt while decreasing the amount of health I got when leveling up didn't change the experience in the slightest. With the exception of boss battles, KH2 was a pretty easy game, so it's a really weak comparison when making this complaint. Kingdom Hearts games being too hard or too easy has always been a pretty debatable topic, but it's also a problem the player can work around by simply not using the best stuff. You can choose to use a different Keyblade if you feel like you're doing too much damage so you don't feel so overpowered. It's something that you can do in pretty much any of the Kingdom Hearts games. But KH3 has one notable advantage. XP0 is available on all difficulties and not just the highest one. So by using XP0 at any time, you can freely adjust the difficulty. One other feature that really impressed me is how surprisingly effective your allies are this time around. Aside from the deeper customization options, they also do a proper set amount of damage in this game. The Keyblade War AI is especially useful as it feels like they're actually helping you fight these guys, with special moves and abilities on par with Sora's. And thank God Donald isn't constantly dying every 5 minutes. This is by far the best he's ever been in the series, as his increased defense allows him to actually be useful in combat. Even Olympus works pretty well as an opening stage. It acts as a steady tutorial, giving the player time to be introduced to the huge arsenal of techniques they'll be using. As a whole, the combat in KH3 really does feel like a successor to KH2. It's polished, active, action-packed, and doesn't let up for a single instant. Now aside from the combat, there's several other things to mention with the gameplay. As I said before, the bigger sizes of the levels provides an enhanced feeling of exploration, and the exploration has a purpose as it's required to complete the Lucky Emblem side quest. It's basically just a hidden Mickey hunt. They act out similarly to the puzzle pieces from KH2, but also have more creativity to them with all the clever ways they're hidden. Searching for them and finding them is really fun and satisfying, and it rewards you with new items and equipment for each milestone you reach. They're not too obvious to find, so it provides a fun challenge in locating them. and it rewards the player for being observant of their surroundings. The gummy phone comes across as a really nice bonus with many different uses, from locating emblems to simply memeing your favorite moments from the game. It also comes with a built-in game mode where you can play several minigames in the new game mode, Classic Kingdom. These minigames were a lot more fun than I was expecting, and I actually would have spent a lot more time on them if I wanted to. They each have a different control scheme that takes advantage of the limited button format, giving you a sense of nostalgia as it really feels like you're playing those old handheld LCD games that you got in your McDonald's Happy Meal. The Classic Kingdom even has a point to it, since unlocking all the games and playing them at least once gives you a new Keyblade. The Gummy Ship mode is by far the best the series has ever had, giving you the ability to free roam across space and travel wherever you want. It's really cool that the ship has its own overworld with a bunch of activities, and it gives the Gummy Ship more of a reason to be in the game than in KH1 and 2. You can search for treasure, collect items, find ship parts and upgrades, fast travel through air currents, explore the wide open galaxy while avoiding obstacles like lava and asteroids. You even have more customization options for your ship by using minerals collected from space as opposed to just using differently colored blocks. It also has a really nice visual appeal, like you're really traveling through what feels like a kid's idea of what outer space looks like, blooming with colors and a ton of atmosphere. You can freely avoid space battles, and if you end up going into one by mistake, you can simply exit out of it from the pause menu. But if you do decide to participate in it, it's a really fun time. It plays out like a fast-paced arcade shooting gallery as KH2 did, where you can use specific techniques and maneuvers to battle enemy ships. You also don't have to worry about switching perspectives anymore, with everything occurring from one point of view, which helps to keep things better focused. You can use all sorts of different upgrades to give you an edge, from offensive weapons to defensive gadgets to healing material. You can also take pictures to unlock new ships and even collect money so you don't have to worry about going broke. This is just about everything that you could possibly want from a Gummy Ship mode. And even though I don't spend a lot of time on it, it's really worth noting the time and detail they put into making this happen. Unfortunately, the gameplay isn't exactly perfect. It still has several noticeable flaws that keep it from being a flawless experience. Most noticeably, the continuous camera issues. I always find myself having a love-hate relationship with the camera in these games because it always ends up leaning in both ways. When the camera works well, it really works well, because the combat is smooth and highly interactive, and seeing all of it play out on screen is really fun to watch. But when the camera doesn't work, it's a real pain in the ass. And in Kingdom Hearts 3, it's a problem that continues to persist. A lot of the time, something ends up jumping in front of your view, usually an enemy or something in the environment cutting off your vision. You have a hard time seeing what's going on, which results in enemies jumping at you with your concentration cut off, which is really frustrating because the game is punishing you for something that's out of your control. Additionally, the camera sometimes has a hard time keeping up with the fast-paced action, which results in it becoming unfocused and swerving around randomly. They also nerfed down the flow motion from Triple D, which just feels really disappointing to me. On some level, I can understand why they did this. They didn't want it to be abused and overpowered in a game where they're already giving you so many different ways to battle enemies. But still, the flow motion was a really fun mechanic. It allowed creative and fast mobility across areas before obtaining abilities like glide and super jump, and it made the environment feel involved in the combat with the numerous ways that you could take advantage of the level design. Jumping off walls and scaling entire buildings was a really cool feature, and now you can't really do that anymore because of how badly it was nerfed. Something that I realized during my second playthrough is that there's practically no reason for the flow motion to be in the game. In spite of the numerous opportunities you're given to use it, a lot of the areas just weren't made with flow motion in mind, so you won't really be using it during combat. It doesn't deal as much damage as other abilities, and the air stepping is a faster method of travel and homing on enemies anyway. The underwater combat is also really buggy and sluggish. From the problematic camera to the slow-paced fighting to the inability to use shot locks and form changes, underwater combat removes the free-flowing movement that you have on the surface and replaces it with a boring and unfocused afterthought. Even the basic swimming controls outside of combat are just really confusing and stagnant, which just makes it a really unpleasant portion of the game. The wall running is also pretty clunky and not fully thought out. I mean, when you're just going upward, it's actually pretty cool to control Sora scaling buildings and structures. But when you try to move left and right, there's this stagger to the controls that results in you fumbling and losing control. It certainly doesn't help that you usually have to fight enemies, but engaging in combat while wall running makes you disconnect from the wall and you risk falling down. There's also the mistake of having glide and double jump tied to the same button because the game is completely unable to recognize when you just want to glide and not do the double jump. One very obnoxious theme in the game is when the story forces you to do these pointless missions that you can't skip. Gathering ingredients during your first visit to Twilight Town just has you running around in circles until you find 9 random pieces of food. something you can easily do by accident while free roaming. There's the Olaf mission, there's the shitty San Francisco obstacle course, and then there's the horrifying crab collecting in the Caribbean. The game has you aimlessly wandering around Port Royale in search of white crabs hiding in boxes and trees and barrels, and it's a needlessly dragged out chore. They do give you a variety of ways to collect them, but it doesn't help that the crab collecting is way too slow in the first place. I loathe these part of the games, not because of how boring and annoying they are, but because of just how extra they felt. They horribly break up the pacing of the game and just feel like they were randomly inserted to consume your time. These could have easily been cut out of the game and you wouldn't lose anything. And then you have the really underwhelming pirate ship combat, which gets really annoying really fast as it exploits the worst aspects of the ship controls. They are way too slow. Enemy ships are constantly turning away from you so you can't hit their weak points, and the ships spawn from way too far away, which throws off your accuracy. And what makes it even worse is that it's mandatory to complete the storyline. There's 2 extremely god-awful boss fights requiring you to use the pirate ship, and they just go on forever. The pirate ship with red orbs is constantly teleporting to the other side of the map, constantly respawning enemy ships, and it's constantly moving around, making it a tedious job just to deal any real damage to it. And in the Kraken battle, your accuracy is constantly being thrown off because of the water physics and the force of the whirlpool. Thankfully, you have the ability to fast travel to an island the first time you go there, so you don't have to worry about pirate ship combat when returning there. There's also the final world, which has this really confusing design to it. It has this really buggy platforming that's made even more confusing when you hit these orbs that change the gravity. You'll never have any way of knowing what kind of effects they have, and you'll most likely end up making the task of collecting Sora's fragments even harder without realizing it. A lot of people have also complained about the game having very little post-game content, and while I do admit that it greatly affects the game's replay value, it's not exactly new for the series. The original KH1 and 2 didn't really have what you would consider post-game content. Coliseum matches and boss fights against Sephiroth, Kurtzisa, and Phantom are all things that you have access to before witnessing the final cutscene. Even content introduced in the final mix versions didn't require defeating the final boss to experience them. The only real post-game content you were ever given was Lingering Will, and even then, the entire rest of the world except Japan had to wait until the PS3 versions to even play it. But even if little post-game content isn't new for Kingdom Hearts, it's still a problem, and it's really annoying that it's still happening this late into the series. The only post-game content that I can think of is the battle gates, which just end up being underwhelming battles against enemies you've already defeated throughout the game. The only new challenge you're given is Dark Inferno, and it ends up being a really unimpressive super boss. I've defeated this guy at level 50 without having to use ultimate form or a Kupo coin, which really goes to show how underwhelming it is. The only thing that qualifies Dark Inferno to be a super boss at all is that its attacks just deal stupid damage. Take that away, and there's just nothing creative or inventive about this battle. It has a pretty small moveset with just 3 different flavors of swinging its swords around, rotating orbs that are considerably easy to block, and a spin attack that can easily be dodged by just jumping at the right time. I had a harder time fighting young Xehanort from Triple D, and that's not even a super boss. It's not even a super boss with any intrigue behind it. The other super bosses from previous games had some sort of interesting appeal behind them that encourage you to seek them out. Sephiroth is one of the most iconic video game villains of all time, so of course people are gonna wanna fight him. Xemnas and Lingering Will liked it as teasers for challenges that would occur in the next game, and left you with a sense of ominous foreshadowing after defeating them. The data battles with Organization 13 allowed you to re-challenge every single member with updated additions to their fights, challenging the player to approach them differently from last time. Dark Inferno doesn't have any of that. It's not a cameo boss, it's not an Easter egg challenge, it's not a secret tie-in to the overall story, it's not a character of any interest of any sort, it's just some random Heartless. And for this to be seen as a greater challenge after defeating Xehanort is extremely lackluster. And perhaps the most annoying thing of all is that there isn't nearly as many boss fights compared to the huge rogues gallery we got in KH2. I'd even go so far as to say that KH1 had more boss fights than KH3. Stuff like this can really hurt a game's replay value, and unfortunately, KH3 doesn't have enough content to match that milestone. There's around 25 to 30 hours of content, which is a satisfying length for a $60 game, but it still leaves a lot to be desired. I also find it really gimmicky that the game does dump all of Sora's abilities on you in the very first level. It's still a good tutorial, but the tutorial isn't supposed to give you absolutely everything in the first 2 hours. And when you put it in context of the story, it doesn't even make any sense. They keep talking about how Sora lost all of his power, but now he's pulling out a shit ton of stuff from under his belt with no explanation. It would have made so much more sense if you unlocked attraction moves for each Disney World you completed, or for Sora to learn shot lock from Aqua after rescuing her. But nope, let's just give everything to Sora right from the get-go instead of allowing him to grow in a progressive manner. Even the battle against 10,000 enemies feels really anticlimactic because of how quickly the fight ends. And unlike KH2, the game doesn't give you enough room to maneuver. You're forced to fight in this little circle, and it's really crowded with a small area combined with the overabundance of enemies. And those lagging animations. I mean, they're just embarrassing. Even some of the Orichalcum Plus requirements suck major ass as they require you to play horrendous flan minigames and fight those stupidly overpowered gummy ships. I mean, sliding down a snowy mountain, finding one in the Caribbean islands, and finding 80 lucky emblems aren't bad because those activities are actually fun. What isn't fun is fighting against heartless ships that can instantly one-shot you and take way too much time to kill. You have to fight 6 of these damn things, and the last one has a whopping 4 phases to fight. It was cool to fight the heartless ships if it was just something that you wanted to do for fun, but doing it because it's something that you need to do in order to get the Ultima weapon makes the entire experience feel forced on you. And the flan minigames are very, very, very bad. You have to get a certain score for each one, and getting those scores is obnoxious. They all have really shitty gimmicks and controls, making the task of obtaining each one a painful chore. Half the time, your ability to even perform well in these minigames is based entirely on luck and has nothing to do with your skill level, making them even more frustrating and time-consuming. They're slow, repetitive, have horrendously awful controls, and don't have enough mechanics to feel engaging. They're just so fucking atrocious. I don't want to say that KH3 is lacking in content because for what they put out, it does feel like a complete game. But there's no denying that there definitely could have been more. Now, as I said earlier, KH3 is currently in its vanilla state, and DLC does have the potential to change how we feel about it in the future. But this is an advantage that KH3 has over KH1 and 2. When those games were made, it was done during a time when DLC wasn't exactly a thing. Additional content was only added to them when Square Enix re-released the games exclusively in Japan in their final mix versions. And even then, the entire rest of the world had to wait until years later to access them on the PS3 as part of a collection bundle. It really sucked ass that people not only had to wait years later to even try it out, but also buy the games again at their full $60 price. But in Kingdom Hearts 3, that isn't going to be an issue. The DLC will be released on schedule, will be done in a couple of months, and it won't cost the price of an entire other game to obtain. So it's pretty safe to say that things will be a lot less complicated than they used to be. But still, in spite of its flaws, Kingdom Hearts 3 still has really good gameplay. From its combat to its exploration to its extra features, there's certainly a good amount of content that'll keep you satisfied. If there was one thing we've been waiting for all this time, it was the satisfaction of beating the shit out of Xehanort. So, the storytelling of Kingdom Hearts 3. This is pretty much the one aspect of the game that everyone seems to agree was handled very poorly. Even for a Kingdom Hearts game, there were a lot of issues to be had with this one. But personally, it wasn't something that bothered me a lot. See, unlike a lot of other people who played this game, my expectations for the story were, shall I say, moderately low. I've already accepted that the Kingdom Hearts storyline, from the backstory to the lore, all the way back to the very first game in 2002, has always been pretty bad. But it was obviously so. It's a crossover between Disney and Final Fantasy made by Squaresoft. I was obviously not going to get something resembling a cohesive narrative in this series. But even if the story of Kingdom Hearts is stupid and makes no sense, it still needs to be fun. Something that keeps your attention and encourages you to want to see what happens next. And a good chunk of the series has succeeded in doing that. The first game, second game, Chain of Memories, Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance, and even Days have something fun and meaningful to offer in spite of the overall clunky narrative. And the one thing that keeps it all from failing is the fact that Kingdom Hearts does not take itself seriously. Like, at all. And it's one of the things I admire most about Tetsuya Nomura's work on the series. Nomura is someone who never really bought into his own hype, accepting that what he put together was just some silly, goofy, childish fanfiction that only ended up happening because a Disney guy and a Squaresoft guy walked into an elevator. When it comes to Kingdom Hearts, he never allows his work to get to a point of being dark and gritty, like he's trying to act like his writing is any smart. He allows the premise he created to play straight with itself so it's able to stand on its own merits. He just had an idea and decided to have fun with it. And I think that best describes Kingdom Hearts as a whole. It's a silly idea that people wanted to have fun with, and they found a way to make it fun. Granted, it doesn't always succeed, but more often than not, it's a way of showing how you don't need something logical or realistic in order to feel convincing. But let's get to the big question. Does Kingdom Hearts 3 succeed at this? Does the story manage to be fun, entertaining, and serve as a proper conclusion to the Dark Seeker saga? Well, Kind of? Okay, let's just get this over with. For what it's worth, Kingdom Hearts 3 manages to be the most straightforward entry in the series since Kingdom Hearts 1. The plot when compared to most entries in the series is actually more simple and easy to follow. There's an evil guy who wants to take over the universe, we need to fight him, and we need to find some missing warriors to help us in the upcoming battle. And that's probably helped by the fact that all of the complicated shit from the last 7 games is already out of the way. Now that all of the lore explaining is done and all of the complicated stuff is done, this game is able to focus on tying up loose ends and setting up the final battle with Xehanort. It's done in a simple way and also done in an approach that's easy to digest. And as a result, it doesn't have as many retcons or complicated mumbo-jumbo as some other entries. One major complaint that people have had with the game is how the Disney worlds have no reason to be there, but the game does give a reason for characters to visit each world. It's especially impressive how each world has a unique reason for drawing organization members to them, actually tying into their motivations and plans. Young Xehanort is invading Toy Box to learn how supposedly empty vessels can have hearts, which plays into the final act of the game. Marluxia and Larxene are invading Corona and Arendelle since their respective princesses have become the new princesses of light, and they see them as potential candidates as Guardians of Light in case Aqua and Ventus can't be revived. Vanitas invades Monstropolis in order to power his Unverse through the negative energy of children's screams. Luxord is in the Caribbean to learn how Davy Jones can be separated from his heart but still be alive, which adds to the organization's research on replicas and vessels. People have wrongfully accused the villains of just standing around and making fun of Sora every few minutes, when their presence in each world actually ties into the story and what they're trying to accomplish. They're actually interacting with what's inside the worlds instead of just sending heartless and nobodies to invade them to antagonize Sora. And even if it's done in a clunky way, the game still delivers on a lot of plot setup from the last 7 games. Roxas and Xion, for example, are finally free to live their own lives and are no longer bound to the manipulation of Xehanort and Xemnas. Aqua, Ventus, and Terra are finally free from their 10-year prison and can carry out the teachings of their master in peace. Ansem the Wise repairs his relationship with most of his old colleagues and is now working towards using his research for the good of others. Even Replica Riku gets to fulfill his promise to protect Naminé by giving her a vessel to start her own life. There's a couple of things in the ending that get relatively good closure and serve as a good ending to those storylines. It's also been said that Kingdom Hearts 3 isn't exactly the end of Sora's story, and it'll continue after the defeat of Xehanort while introducing a new storyline. So instead of looking at Kingdom Hearts 3 as this big, epic conclusion, it's meant to be seen as the next chapter in a bigger unfolding story. The game's epilogue isn't as disappointing because this isn't the grand finale and is instead acting as a gateway for future events. And of course, the character writing, when it works, has always been one of the best things of any Kingdom Hearts game. One thing that Kingdom Hearts 3 does amazingly throughout the entire game is how it handles the friendship between Sora, Donald, and Goofy. They feel like this really close group of buddies who occasionally tease each other while keeping it in good fun. But they also act highly supportive of each other, demonstrating the teamwork dynamic and the loyalty of their friendship. After everything they've been through over the years, there's an intrinsic method to how they interact, and it's just so deep and meaningful. Axel, or Lee, also feels much more fleshed out in this game, which I really find impressive considering the somewhat minimal amount of screen time he gets. He has the same upbeat snarky attitude he's known for, and now that he's a normal human again, it feels more humble and genuine. His conversations with Kairi are pretty cute, and it actually leads into a nice throwback from Days.
Don't hold back, Lee. Promise? Please don't hold back, Axel. Promise.
One of my favorite moments in the game is seeing him with Isa and they talk like old friends who ended up growing apart. The way these two interact with each other has this really bittersweet sentiment that drives the parallel between the paths they chose to follow. And it's also the most human that Isa has ever acted in the series. He's very playful and charismatic as opposed to being jealous and cold. You get the idea that in spite of being on opposite sides, he still thinks of Axel as an equal, taking the time to just talk things over or catch up on old times, to the point where you really start to question what could have caused them to have their falling out in the first place. After all the time he spent talking about his desire for emotions and having his own heart, he gets to have a more active and direct personality. He actually shares a really deep chemistry with Axel in this game, and it's appropriately tragic. Then you have Riku going with Mickey Mouse to find Aqua, but their subplot ends up amounting to just going in circles until Sora shows up to save the day. Let me level with you guys for a moment. Riku is my all-time favorite character in the series, to the point where I actually think that he was meant to be the main character over Sora. He's the one who goes the most and goes through the most change over the course of the series, making him feel like a much more profound protagonist. I can understand that some people were annoyed that Riku was sidelined and didn't get enough involvement in the story, but to be honest, I'm okay with it. I already figured out long before KH3 came out that it was going to be about Sora and not him. so I wasn't expecting a bunch of Riku outside of maybe 1 or 2 segments controlling him, which is exactly what I got. Aside from that, the game doesn't really have a motive to focus on him. Riku didn't need any more time and focus being put on him because his character arc was, well, finished. Everything that needed to happen to Riku already happened in the previous games. He had a genuine relationship with Sora in Kingdom Hearts 1, he had a good redemption arc in Chain of Memories, he made a selfless sacrifice while also finding sympathy for Roxas and Xion in Days, he regained his humanity and made up with Sora in Kingdom Hearts 2, and had fully confronted the darkness that Xehanort was manipulating in him in Dream Drop Distance. And at the end of that game, he became a Keyblade Master and proved that he was worthy of using the Keyblade's power. Everything about Riku had come full circle by the end of Triple D, so there's really no reason for that much more focus to be put on him. And even then, he still gets one of the best moments in the game. In the Keyblade Graveyard, when everyone else has given up, he's the only one who actually stands his ground and fights back to restore Sora's morale. Even in small bits, Riku gets to be one of the most compelling people in Kingdom Hearts because of how much he's grown and how he gets to stay consistent in his character development. The Disney characters interacting with organization members get some really great gems of writing because they have a wicked sense of humor attached to them. It feels so surreal, but the insanity just makes it all the more crazy fun. In what other video game will you ever see Woody of Toy Story telling an anime villain that can his edgy bullshit?
The darkness of being alone is a power even greater. Darkness is the heart's true nature.
Whatever you're talking about, I don't care. Put Buzz back the way he was, then get lost.
Oh shit! Oh shit!
Watching Woody savagely burn Xehanort, Sully, and Mike going to absolute extremes to get rid of Vanitas, and Jack knocking Luxord overboard by breathing his unbrushed fumes right in his face are some of the greatest moments I've ever seen in a video game. It's the kind of madness that can only happen in Kingdom Hearts, and it's great. Even the organization gets some interesting writing with how you interact with them after they're defeated. The battles themselves are balls-to-the-wall non-stop action which keeps you at the edge of your seat the whole time. It's a fun boss rush because they give each member distinct movesets and fighting styles, so you're not fighting the same enemy 12 times. And the cutscenes in between are actually pretty interesting. They provide a sense of closure to each villain, with their lines helping to make them feel more three-dimensional. It may not seem like much at first glance, but when you really start to notice what they actually mean, it puts them into a really interesting perspective.
There is so very much to learn. You understand so little. One who knows nothing can understand nothing.
It is time to move on, boy. There is more to seek. So go forth now and seek it.
Finally, there's this huge mind-blowing plot twist in the game's epilogue. I'm not gonna give anything away to anyone who hasn't seen it yet, but one of the characters gets this huge reveal to what their real identity is. And after seeing it, I have to admit, it really puts a lot of scenes from the previous games into an entirely new perspective. Knowing what we know about this character now adds something interesting to each scene that they're in leading up to this point. It's kinda like the Pink Diamond twist from Steven Universe, except it's actually done right. So with all that out of the way, I think it's time to talk about the problems that this story has. So at what point does the Kingdom Hearts 3 storyline start to fall flat? Well, there's actually a bunch of problems in the story, but they can all be traced down to one major factor: the awful, awful pacing. The actual plot of the game is completely put on pause after visiting Twilight Town, and it doesn't continue until the last quarter of the game after completing all the Disney worlds, which results in things going from painfully slow to way too fast. There are these in-between cutscenes after completing each world, but they don't really do much to progress the main plot, and even then, they kinda just feel like small reminders of previous games. One cutscene literally has Mickey and Riku explaining information to each other that they already know. Why are they returning to the scene of the crime to talk about something that they already know about? It's just a boring waste of time. Absolutely nothing significant happens until the last 3 hours of cutscenes, which means that everything regarding Aqua, Ventus, the Keyblade Graveyard, the Keyblade War, Roxas, Xion, Terra, and Xehanort all get crammed into one single portion of the game. There's very little focus being put into the actual building up to the climax. And because there's no natural build-up to this final battle, major plot elements and several emotional moments end up just going by without them having any real impact on you. Xion comes back with no explanation. Roxas returning is barely given any focus because it took place in the middle of a boss rush. Sora gets the power of waking literally out of nowhere. Apparently he had it the whole time and was only able to use it through Ventus when it was most convenient for the plot. Riku and Mickey's subplot just goes around in circles, spending the first 2 acts fighting the Demon Tower until Sora comes to save them. Sora finds Erika's Keyblade out of nowhere and somehow, with no explanation, is knowledgeable enough to know how to use it to open a door to the Dark World. Sora is constantly being told that he can't go there because he's not strong enough, but then it's shown that he could have easily gone there at any time, so they were just keeping him out of there for cheap suspense. And not to mention, Lingering Will shows up to fight Terranort for a bit, and then completely disappears from the game. Where did he go? What happened to him? Did he get sucked into the Guardian? Was the soul in the armor somehow absorbed? The Lingering Will was a huge plot point because it was part of the key to finding Terra. It was a huge piece of foreshadowing in KH2 and Birth by Sleep, but for some reason it's completely forgotten about entirely. They were clearly using it to build something up, but then decided that it's not important anymore, which is not how build-up works. The Kingdom Hearts series has always had a jumbled sense of pacing before now, but they at least felt more restrained. Something that helped KH1 and 2 to have a better sense of pacing was that they had some sort of middle section in the story, where the trio returned to Traverse Town or Hollow Bastion. These in-between segments helped to expand the story while also providing a decent break from the Disney worlds, giving the player a breath of fresh air and an appreciation for the non-Disney aspects of the game. Kingdom Hearts 3 doesn't have that middle section. Once you finish Twilight Town, it's nothing but Disney worlds for the next 12 hours. You feel like you're just going from Disney property to Disney property until the battle with Aqua, where the plot actually picks up. The actually important stuff shouldn't be happening at the very tail end of the game, and I feel like it's a problem that would have been avoided if Kingdom Hearts 3 just had that in the middle section. Maybe have Sora go rescuing Aqua after completing Corona, and maybe have the Dark World be an actual world instead of just a bunch of cutscenes. Maybe after completing Arendelle, the story shifts to Aqua, who travels to the Land of Departure while fighting off Heartless and Unversed to save Ventus from Vanitas. Actually have Aqua be a badass instead of getting her ass kicked and have to be saved by Ventus. Then after San Francisco, you get to play as Kairi and battle against Axel, and you actually get to see the training that they went through to become proper Keyblade warriors. Have everything happen in little helpings instead of all at once so that the key events feel more fleshed out. I mean, they made the power of waking look like it was really easy for Sora to get, making the search for it completely pointless busy work. They keep telling Sora that he's not strong enough to help Riku and Mickey, but then he's able to defeat Aqua by himself when Riku and Mickey were struggling against her. They didn't even make the search for the power of waking the main focus of the Disney worlds. I just don't see why they couldn't have that middle section to help pad things out better to improve the pacing. Even some kind of run-in with Pete and Maleficent would have been satisfying instead of just making them insignificant background characters who only show up to serve as a red herring for the next game. And that's another problem. They make Pete and Maleficent completely pointless in this game. They barely get any screen time, and it's just about them looking for that black box that Luxu was carrying around. And it literally goes nowhere and doesn't have any relevance to the battle with Xehanort. They don't have any impact on the story, they don't even interact with any of the characters. They just stand around and do a bunch of foreshadowing, and none of it really matters. It feels like they were more focused on foreshadowing Kingdom Hearts 4 than developing the plot of Kingdom Hearts 3, which wouldn't be so bad except that it's pretty apparent in how absent-minded it feels. Why is Sora acting like Roxas needs to be saved when he was already saved? The entire point of his character arc was regaining his humanity and returning to Sora as part of his missing half. He learned that he was part of Sora all along and accepted his fate and made the decision to join him to feel whole again. He made his peace with Sora, so having him removed from his body undermines the emotional weight of that entire subplot. And why the hell doesn't Namine get an appearance until the final cutscene? She's literally on the goddamn box art! There's also this huge time-wasting event where everyone is killed just to make the player go through an extended marathon appeasing them all back together with the obnoxious platforming segment in the final world. And you wanna know the real kicker? The cutscene where you see Terra the second time literally plays out in the exact same way like the previous situation never happened. There was literally no reason for all this losing hope, collecting Sora's fragments, and saving everyone from the Lich bullshit. But if you thought that was bad, wait until you see the bullshit way they try to retcon Xehanort's character by making him into a misunderstood good guy in the last 10 minutes of the story. They try to sell you the idea that Xehanort was trying to bring light into the universe consumed by darkness, and that he wanted to correct the mistakes of the past. The problem with that is that the previous game spent way too much time making him evil and manipulative, deliberately and knowingly causing so much suffering with no remorse or hesitation. This big dramatic "I'm the only one who can do this" moment they try to give him is happening 35 minutes after he just killed Kairi in front of Sora. The way Xehanort is written in these final moments is completely different from the Xehanort we've been watching up to this point, and is his new motivation doesn't even make any sense, and it completely contradicts his strongly driven moments in Birth by Sleep. In that game, he spends a lot of time debating how darkness and light are two contrasting entities that need to exist in balance. His manipulation over Terra was entirely based around channeling a balance between the two. Now he's telling us that he wants to completely eliminate the darkness and create a world of pure light? And even if that's what he really wanted, why did he go through the trouble of killing Ericus? He practically wanted the same thing. What else am I supposed to take away from that other than Xehanort killed his best friend because he just felt like doing it? And in spite of trying to destroy the universe, killing a teenage girl, and destroying entire worlds with his dark forces, he still gets a perfect happy ending with Ericus to play some more stupid chess games. He doesn't even offer to help bring back Kairi before he dies. When people talk about villains getting undeserved reformations, this is probably about as on point as it possibly gets. Xehanort did absolutely nothing to earn his happy ending with Ericus, and outside of Sora, none of the other characters seem to show any form of anger for all the trouble he caused. Hell, even Sora doesn't seem to have the realistic responses that you'd give to a guy who just killed your girlfriend 20 minutes ago. They literally have Donald and Goofy looking at him with empathy while listening to his bullshit excuses, in spite of the fact that he was constantly trying to kill the closest thing to a brother they've ever had. I can almost swear that I last saw this character being discussed in a Lily Orchard video. And then you have Kairi, and oh my god, they really fucked up Kairi in this game. What happens to her is every definition of wasted potential, and it makes her into even more of a tool than she was before. She ends up being rescued not once, not twice, but 3 times in this game. And they all take place during the final act where it's supposedly her turn to fight. When Terranort is about to attack her, she makes no attempt to defend herself. She doesn't even summon her Keyblade to block the attack. She just stands there like an idiot while Sora and Goofy have to move in to protect her. Then she gets kidnapped by the Shadow Swarm, then Xemnas grabs her and she makes no attempt to escape from him. She doesn't summon her Keyblade in her other hand, not even an attempt to elbow him or kick him to get free. Belle was kidnapped by Zaldin in the exact same way, and she actually took some sort of action to escape her captor. And then, after all the time they spend propping her up as a fighter, after all the talk about how it's her turn to fight for Sora, after all the advertisements showing how she's going to be a Keyblade warrior, even showing her model in a fighting pose, she just dies. Like, literally dies without doing anything to contribute to the plot. They give her a Keyblade, build her up as a strong independent fighter, and make her one of the chosen 7 to fight Xehanort, only to have her killed off while being held hostage. And to make it even worse, her death is used to get Sora to attack Xehanort to get the last Dark Key. So not only did they horrendously mislead us about Kairi's contribution to the story, they turned her into a blatant plot device. She was placed in what is literally the Dragon Ball Z hyperbolic time chamber to train with Lee, one of the former top assassins of Xemnas' organization, and it all amounts to fucking nothing. And because they were so misleading about what Kairi would be like in this game, it comes across as highly insulting. Why go through all that build-up and foreshadowing if you're just going to make her into a tool instead of an actual character? There's no reason for Kairi to keep being a damsel in distress for the sake of making Sora look good. Just let her do something! It would have been as simple as not building her up at all and not giving her a Keyblade in the first place. The only reason she even has one is because Riku broke all logic on how they choose an owner and just gives one to her. Like seriously, he just pulls that damn thing out of his ass. She didn't do anything to earn that Keyblade before, and she hasn't done anything to earn its sense. What happens to Kairi in this game is easily one of the worst pieces of writing in the series, not because of how misleading it is, but because of how painfully underwhelming it is. Even as someone who wasn't expecting much, it left me severely disappointed. She was given so many opportunities to do something, just something, and she ends up doing nothing. At least in the previous games, her role in the story had a consistency to it. She wasn't expected to do much except be a close friend to Sora and be a mutual support for battling the forces of evil. It was a simple role in the story that she filled properly while still giving a fun and lighthearted performance. Her relevance in 1 and 2 was meant to be minimal because they needed to develop other aspects of the plot, and putting too much focus on the romance would have undermined that development. And despite that, she still has enough depth, humanity, and relatability that gives you an idea as to why Sora would care about her. Her moment with Sora in KH1 where she expresses her fear of change because of how it could distance her from people she loves, and her moment with Riku in KH2 where she helps him get over his anxiety of being reunited with Sora in his current state, are great moments for her. It's really good writing for her character that you wouldn't expect from her minimal role in the story. But in KH3, now that she's being handed a huge and very important role, she doesn't get to do anything. Not one scene that she's given in this game reaches the emotions of the scenes that she got in the other 2 games. I mean, she gives Sora a Paupu fruit and wants to marry him, but what does that really add? We already knew they were together, so it doesn't change the dynamic of their relationship. The very least they could have done was give her some sort of heroic sacrifice, where instead of just getting kidnapped, she places herself in danger to protect Sora. It wouldn't have been much, but it would have been something at the very least. Finally, there's the issue of the Tangled, Frozen, and Pirate worlds just being repeats of the original movies. Now, this really isn't a new problem in the series, since we've had worlds that were boring rehashes of the movies before. Kingdom Hearts 2 had The Lion King, Mulan, and The Little Mermaid. Birth by Sleep had Cinderella, Snow White, and Sleeping Beauty. Dream Drop Distance had The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Tron Legacy, and The Three Musketeers. But even if it's not a new problem, it's still a problem. Now, having the trio going through the plots of the original movies can work if they do enough to influence the events of the movie in some way. And that's the main problem with Corona, Arendelle, and the Caribbean. They don't really do anything to interact with or influence the events of the movie. They basically just do a beat by beat of the scenes while the trio are just standing around in the background like self-inserted OCs. And what makes it even worse is that these three worlds leave huge gaps in the stories of their respective movies. They don't offer enough context from the films and leave really important plot elements out, making the recaps of these films extremely empty. Take for example the Tangle world, which leaves out a lot, and I do mean a lot, out of the original film. In the KH3 version, they leave out the scene where Flynn discovers that Rapunzel's hair is magic. So in the scene where Gothel is threatening to separate them, he's not given a reason to cut her hair. It's a key point in the film that's left out of the game entirely. So Flynn believing that cutting her hair will set her free makes no sense in this universe. Then in the middle of the story, the trio are approached by Mother Gothel, who tells them she's Rapunzel's mother, and the trio never think to tell Rapunzel that they came across a woman claiming to be her mother. And in the scene where they're on the boat, Rapunzel just suddenly has the bag with the satchel in it. We don't get the scene where Gothel gives it to her in secret, so why is it there now? Did she just magically pull it out of her ass? Then there's the subplot with Marluxia and Gothel where it looks like they're gonna work together, but there's no scenes of them ever interacting with each other. They do this thing with Gothel's eyes where it looks like she's gonna be controlled and it looks like they're gonna play a part in the story, but the events of the movie never change. Why tease Gothel and Marluxia interacting if you don't have Gothel and Marluxia interacting? And how does Flynn know about Gothel being behind all this if he was knocked out and left on the boat? It would be one thing if they showed the scene where those two guys told him about Gothel, but those two guys never even make an appearance in the game. They don't even bother to show how Flynn escaped from his execution. Even the part where Flynn reveals his real name and Rapunzel mentions how it was supposed to be between them raises confusion. It was something that happened in the movie and not just something that happened off screen in the game. If it's supposed to be an important detail, then it has to be shown. Because of how badly rushed the pacing is, they end up cutting very important scenes out of the storyline and make the experience of actually reliving these movies an underwhelming bore. It's not even a problem exclusive to Corona. When you get to the Pirates world, they just throw you into the events of the third movie without the setup of the second one. There's extremely little context or explanation of the events of Dead Man's Chest in order to properly follow this watered-down version of At World's End. They literally took out William's father and just had his scenes acted out by Sora. And in the Frozen world, if you never saw the original movie, you would be completely confused as to who this Hans guy is and why he's suddenly the villain. People may try to defend this by saying, oh well, it happened in the movie and only fans of Disney movies would be playing Kingdom Hearts anyway. But that's not good enough. You have to show us the context of the films. Dream Drop Distance understood this by allowing us to see context of the movies by having them explained in flashbacks. I know it's what happened in the movie, but the game just expects you to go by what they show you with very little context of the original story. If I really wanted to watch Tangled, Frozen, and Pirates 3, then I could simply just watch the movie since all of the plot elements would be present. This is why worlds that don't just rehash the movies are so much better because they offer a refreshing experience. Toy Box, Monstropolis, and San Francisco were much more interesting because they weren't just copy-pasting their respective films. They work for both people who have and haven't seen the movie. Those who didn't see them will have an easier time following the story with less confusion, and those who did see them get refreshing and unique storylines with characters they're familiar with. Toy Box is one of my all-time favorite worlds, partly because it tells a unique and refreshing story with Woody and Buzz while having them interact with the characters in an interesting way. I've actually heard from a lot of people that Disney had way too much influence over how Nomura was representing these movies. And after seeing these cutscenes for myself, it's actually really telling. Nomura had to really gamble with Disney to get the rights to Pixar, and it does feel like they gave him the rights a little bit too late by the time they started working on a deadline. storyline. I feel like the game would have definitely benefited from just a little bit more creative freedom so that these worlds wouldn't just feel like a weak advertisement for the movies. And the storyline overall could have definitely benefited from better pacing. Maybe if they had taken things more slowly with the final battle or not just have everything dumped onto us at the very end, Kingdom Hearts 3 would have definitely had a more satisfying story. It's not entirely bad though because they do take time to address the certain plot holes from previous games, but it's definitely not enough to make up for it. If you want to foreshadow Kingdom Hearts 4, that's fine, but at least put more thought into the present. Granted that gameplay is more important in a video game, but the story still has to be handled properly. So, after everything that's been said and done, how exactly does Kingdom Hearts 3 hold up? Well, obviously in spite of all its flaws, it's still a pretty good game. It's a delight to experience and a satisfying return to the world of Tetsuya Nomura's crazy fanfiction. It's especially rewarding for longtime fans of the series and can even be enjoyable for some newcomers who took the time to catch up on the series in the months prior to its release. Do I think the game is perfect? No. Do I think it's Game of the Year material? No. Could it have been better? Absolutely. But for all these idiots to misrepresent the game by just indulging in the belief that it was disappointing or trash or shit or badly designed, without taking more time to think about its content or how it compares to other entries in the series, just feels really dishonest. The presentation is still astounding, practically the best in the series to date. The amount of time and passion they put into the music, graphics, level designs, and different ways you can interact with party members really shows, and it helps to make the experience more refreshing. The gameplay is still as good as it's ever been, taking everything that people loved about KH2 and experimenting with some new material, while giving the players so many options to engage in combat however they want. And in spite of the really jarring problems the story has, it still turns up some good writing. There's some pretty fun interactions with the Disney characters, and it offers some reasonable resolutions to many of the plot points that have been part of the series since the first game. If you were to ask me, I'd say that my favorite entry in the series would be a hard tie between KH2 and KH3. KH3 has the best gameplay and the best levels, but KH2 definitely has more content and a more coherent narrative. And as I said before, there's upcoming DLC that will have an effect on the game's quality in the future, so more stages and more boss fights and some extra cutscenes to fill in the blanks will definitely help tip the scales. But for now as it stands, Kingdom Hearts 3 is a solid 8 out of 10. It's a definite treat for longtime fans and a fun experience in spite of its flaws. Flaws that will hopefully be improved upon in the future, so we'll just have to wait and see. On a side note, thanks for checking out my review. It's something that I've been working on for a while, and it's something that I really want to get out there. Kingdom Hearts has been one of my great passions for pretty much my whole life, and I figured this would be a good time to talk about it. If you like how this came out, feel free to support me on Patreon. You'll get to see your name at the beginning or ending of each of my videos and help this channel to grow more over time. You can also subscribe to stay tuned for future content and even ring that bell icon to stay notified. So until next time, take care of yourselves and stay awesome. This is Map, signing out.